Greetings, Mark Rang here, publisher of The Sun, and today my guests are two members of the Conway Municipal Budget Committee, Peter Donohoe, right here, Chairman, and Bill Marvel. How are you guys doing?
Great.
Well enough.
Well enough. Okay, well, it's a good, it's Friday, so we all should be well enough, I suppose.
Indeed.
So we're going to talk about budgets and all that, but first, just to understand how the Budget Committee works. So you have the hearings, right? The school board comes to you, town comes to you, presents their budgets, you guys public hearings, and then the Budget Committee actually sets the budget, goes on the town warrant.
That's correct. That's correct.
All right. And then after it's on the town warrant, there's a town and a school deliberative sessions, as we know, and at that point, the Budget Committee or people from the audience can either affirm or change the budgets, right?
That's
right.
right.
And then that number goes on the town warrant, the ballot in April.
That's correct.
Yes.
All right. Okay, good. So where do you want to start? One thing a letter writer has brought up, what's his name? Alex Loth.
Yes.
So there's a letter in tomorrow's paper, and he says he's challenging you, Bill, and says that, you know, because anybody in Conway has felt big tax increases, particularly this one.
Yes.
But the school budget actually didn't go up last year, right?
Well, we cut, they lost their proposed budget, and the default budget passed.
Right.
Right.
So yes.
So the higher, I guess my point is the higher tax bills right now that we all received this last month wasn't caused by the school budget, it was caused by the reval.
That's partially true. I mean, the residential taxpayers were hit a lot harder than the commercial this time. And I think I explained that at a selectmen's meeting once. But nevertheless, the school budget is always much higher than the town budget. So whatever the tax rate is, most of that goes to the schools.
Yeah, so we know that the town budget is whatever it is, 13 or 14 million.
Mm-hmm.
School budget is 40 million. Town budget doesn't go up a whole lot, the school does. The Budget Committee looks at both budgets, but can we give the town budget a free pass for the purpose of this conversation and move on to school? Or we're
Not entirely.
Okay.
I mean, the town is always a lot lower than the school, but it has been creeping upward both in amount and in proportion for the last few years. Now we're over 15 million. 15.3 is what they were requesting, about 400,000 more than last year. And as in the schools, reorganization of the departments seems to have some of the effect. I mean, the new engineers department now is up 35%, largely because he's going to be there for the full year. Assessing is up about 20-some%. And of course, the ambulance issue, which is new really as a townwide, other than as a contract, that's up 160%.
Peter, do you see any, you think there's going to be a lot of discussion within the Budget Committee about reviewing the town? I know you always review
I
it.
do. And actually, my bent this time around is going to focus not just on operating budgets, but on the sum total of, just to use the town as an example, we have an operating budget, proposed operating budget. We have warrant article requests, which include selectmen's warrant articles, petitioned warrant articles, the nonprofit slate, as well as the capital reserves. And I find it not misleading, but when it comes to discussions about the budgets, whether it's the school or the town, there is never an inclusion of what the sum total of those would be. In the case of the school operating budget, most of the time the warrant articles pass. Those would include, but wouldn't be limited to, things like teachers' contracts, the capital reserve funds for equipment, and there's a couple of new ones which we'll get into a little bit later in this discussion. On the town side, there's not always a lot of selectmen's warrant articles, although I think we're going to be seeing the police bond being presented to the voters again this year, so that's a big deal. In addition to that are all of the many capital reserve funds for the town for highway garage, equipment, solid waste, for government buildings, things like that. And when you add all of those together, that's when you get, assuming that they'll all pass, by the way, and historically they have, that's when you get the more complete picture of what the town and or the school budgets
and
look like.
And the budget committee makes recommendations on the special articles too, right?
Yes.
That's
So,
correct.
Bill, do you think I mean, the big one on the town side, which totally makes sense, is the police, because that's whatever it is, 5 million,
Oh, it's
8
more.
million.
It was closer to 9.
9 million,
It
okay.
was
Are we talking
9.
about the renovation, or are we talking about their operating budget?
No, they
No,
renovate the
The
special.
renovation, yeah.
So do you think that's going to pass?
I have no idea.
I think the budget committee is going to recommend it.
It depends. There's always that possibility, and it may be stronger this year than last. As far as the need of that building, well, I'm not even going to bother going through it again this year because I've already seen it, and I'm convinced of the need of most, if not all, of the reasons for the renovation. But my question now, as last year, is can we afford it? And with some of the expenses that the school district is coming up with, and an apparent inability to reduce their budget no matter how low enrollment falls, I wonder whether we can afford it.
You have a sense of that, Peter, about the because
Please.
that's really the big thing on the town side.
I don't want to sway anybody on our committee prematurely with any recommendation I may have to support it or not. The two things I see this year that are important are continual inflation in building costs, which concern me, and secondarily, some of the preliminary bond bank figures that the department or the town has provided suggest that the cost of borrowing is getting cheaper, and whether that trajectory we can count on that to continue into the future remains uncertain, but at least those two things are positive in addition to the need. The affordability question is still something we need to determine, if not for the reason that we just don't have the full picture from the town yet. They have not presented their slate of warrant
So
articles.
besides the and not to get too far in the weeds, but
Yes.
do you see any big areas, and before we move on to the school,
Yes.
which is the big boy, do you see any specific areas on the town side that you foresee the budget committee looking at carefully?
It would be that bond article that I would expect to attract the most attention. The town budget is its incremental increases are mostly understandable on the larger ticket items, and those that you could trim would be minimal.
All right. Now, the school, I know there's a lot to talk about with the school, and one of the most startling things, I don't know if you brought it out, Bill, I'm sure you have in some reference on your columns, but that the high school graduating class this coming year is going to be about half the size as it was 20 years ago.
Okay. Well, I don't know those numbers, but I just, was it 2 nights ago, I finally got the number of full-time equivalent staff for the school district, and I think it came to 318.91 people because of all the partial positions. And I congratulated the administration somewhat facetiously because for the first time in 22 years, they have a smaller staff by about 2 people than they had when they had 55% more students. There were, I think in 2002, there were 2,180 students. Now we have 1,410, and they have the same number of people. Through the years of Carl Nelson and Kevin Richards' management, there was a steady, apparent effort to hire more people while enrollment was gradually dropping, and that tendency has brought us to my continual complaint about overstaff.
So I mean, buildings are expensive and all that, but and you can tell me what the percentage of the budget is payroll, but it's a lot, right?
Over
It's
80.
estimated. Well,
Is it?
we heard if Bill said over 80. I've heard Kevin Richards say 75
Yeah,
before.
so that's where all the money, a
Yeah.
big chunk of the money is being, sort of like the federal government.
Yeah.
You know, once you get rid of Medicaid and Medicare and defense, there's nothing left.
And also it probably depends on whether or not you include things like the retirement options for, well, we spend, I think, $3 million now just on
Yeah.
insurance for retirees.
Yeah.
One of those great benefits that they loaded toward the end of teacher careers, and that explains why starting teachers.
Well, health
are not
insurance
getting-
is something that's always been my thing and I think the health insurance is about 20% of the whole budget. I mean, it's a
It's a
crazy
big number.
number.
Well, one thing that did happen that was good is that all of the staff of the schools they're using the same insurance now, and that gives them a
That is good.
yeah.
Right, but it's still way more expensive than if you bought it privately.
Oh, well,
Because the school goes through a trust, and they have to trust to buy their insurance, and they're a middle person,
Yep.
which is another story. I mean,
Sure.
you buy a single plan is not $24,000 when you buy it.
right.
Yeah, but anyway,
Yeah.
that's another whole topic. So, regarding personnel, I mean, when you say they've added all these people, which they have,
Yes.
but how many of them are necessary or mandatory? Like they have, I think Lloyd was saying there are like 80 aides. Aides.
Uh-huh.
You know, so those one-on-one aides, like, I mean, where would be
Some.
the big personnel areas you'd look at?
Well, what I have always looked at is the additional administration that they've piled on over the years, and you will hear from administration that all of those people are absolutely necessary, and a reasonable person could question that. But we have a number of positions that are statutorily mandated, and that's the excuse that's given in those cases. But then in other cases where they're not, like the family support liaisons, and some of the additional, well, we have 2 deans now, at the high school. Those things are, though the liaisons are not statutorily required, but we're told they're absolutely necessary.
Peter, what do you think?
My tact is a little different. I agree with everything Bill says, but I see some structural realities within the school district now. I'll use as an example the fact that Kennett High School's graduating number of credits stands at 25, where we have a 20 credit requirement for the state of New Hampshire. That leads me to believe, and it bears out in some of these concerns that we have about overstaffing, that we have perhaps too much in our system that's not giving us a very good return on investment when it comes to staff. That is, robustness in programs that doesn't need to be there. We haven't seen figures this year for the what we often request to be some statistics on under-enrollment and if there's any policy changes going on with any of the classes. But all of these things, all of these sort of structural norms, in my opinion, they need to be investigated and reevaluated in this sort of a budgetary environment, because the path that we're on is simply unsustainable in this regard. And if we're going to change something, we have to go back to the original structure and reevaluate that, which of course is the job of the school board.
But if you have higher requirements, isn't that good? Isn't that we're providing a better education?
Other school districts offer graduated types of degrees, a 20 credit state degree, a 22 credit diploma rather. I don't call high school diplomas degrees, a 22 credit scholars diploma, and or a 24 or 25 credit, what do they call that, endorsed diploma, something like that. And the fact that they offer those, graduated levels offers people who don't want to go on to college an opportunity to finish earlier, or perhaps to get a more intense education in those 20 credits. I graduated with, I think, 16 credits from Kennett, and I was fairly well versed in all of the courses that I took when I left, not because I was a good student particularly, but because there was a lot of attention to that. And
I mean, the most obvious thing, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the most
Go
obvious
ahead.
thing about the increased personnel that regular people would see is that now, instead of having an assistant and a superintendent assistant, we have a superintendent assistant, and now we just hired a curriculum coordinator, which I always thought is what the assistant superintendent did.
Yes.
Is that going to be, I mean, that's just an obvious thing that people can see,
Yeah.
as an extra person, but what do you think of that extra hire, I guess? I guess it's Krista Bichet, who's the new
Right.
curriculum coordinator.
Right.
Well,
And it's not anything about her. I mean, she's got credentials and she's a fine person, sure.
Right. No, I'll quickly say that I so far on face value, I believe what the administration is saying about the rationale for making that choice, and that is to get out in front of the problem that everybody knows is declining test scores and increasing costs. And in particular, with the declining test scores, the absence of a curriculum coordinator, I think, could be considered to be fundamental to reversing course on that front.
So that could pass the budget committee?
it passes the smell test, if that's what you mean.
Right.
Yes. The same fellow who you say is criticizing me in an upcoming letter was on the budget committee, made a comment early in his tenure when he got on the committee that we want to continue giving children a quality education. And even if you ignore that use of quality as a positive adjective instead of a neutral noun, he was not talking about the Conway School District when he was talking about good quality education. We're failing more than half the students in this school district. Fewer than half of Conway students are reading at grade level. Fewer than a third are competent in math, and fewer than a quarter are proficient in science. So yes, it looks good that they're looking at curriculum finally, but were I on the school board, I'd be wondering about the Career Tech Center, because we're told that a lot of the reason for the apparent overstaffing is that, and a lot of the money goes into that. And it strikes me that between the two, we have a lot of flash and fluff. The academics are kind of fluffy, and the technical side is a little flashy. And I guess I would just ask, while it's great to have students who can leave high school with a student pilot license or have a little internship with NASA, is it worth that for a few students in order that 10 or 20% more can't read at grade level?
Are they mutually exclusive, though? Because, are they mutually exclusive? Why can't you have both? I mean, academically, why can't you have a very good humanities program and core curriculum and still have
Last I knew, there were only so many hours in a school day.
Yeah, but the kids, go ahead.
Well, I've noticed that while in the block scheduling, classes tend to be a little longer, they don't tend to be as intense as they used to be. And besides that, the block scheduling leaves about a quarter of the classes divided by lunch. So you have a class that goes on for 40 minutes or so, and then they go to lunch, and then they come back and try to regain their attention. I just don't think that there is enough time spent on the core disciplines. And when you have what used to be a year-long course in, say, English, that's now a semester long, is it worth as much? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
You don't get as much reading done. You don't get as much in-depth discussion.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of concepts is that one is George Epstein sits in every once in a while, and he taught at Kennett actually when he started 40 years ago, whenever. And he says the strength of the curriculum is with the department heads. So how much of it is just I'm not disparaging anybody at Kennett. I don't even know the teachers anymore. But how much is it, can the budget committee or should the school board look at the actual teaching practices of department heads? He was talking about, you know, all the department heads who would, on their own with a little stipend, would just make sure that the kids did this and that. And is that culture lost at Kennett, or do you have any idea?
I have no idea because I'm not, I mean, the public is hardly welcome in the schools, so it would be difficult to assess that. But the one thing I can see, and from our perspective, that's what's important, that the budget is getting out of hand. Now, 45, 50 years ago, a superintendent here suggested that if you're going to cut the school budget, let the school board decide where the cuts are. And that way whatever direction they're taking won't necessarily be derailed. And if administration thinks that that's the problem, then they should address that.
So, which leads, actually it's a good lead into what's the budget committee's overall strategy then? I mean, last year, for the first time that I can remember, we had a default budget because of the bond expired, which was $1.5 million less than the school board's budget or something like that.
Yeah,
and then, so there was actually a difference.
Right.
So at the April ballot, people voted for that. Normally there isn't. So with that bill, and I'll ask this, Peter, you can answer this first, is the objective for the school board to then say, okay, it's $1 million cut or $2 million, or you're going to be more specific in areas of suggestions to cut?
If you don't mind me getting into the weeds a little bit, Mark, I want to say one thing before I tell you what I think about this year's strategy. It's often misunderstood about budgets, surpluses, and timeframes when it comes to the school district. Because, for instance, and we hear the school district complain about this all the time, they're budgeting out as much as 18 months into the future. So what the school board is presenting us now is actually the fiscal year 25-26 budget, which will begin on July 1st of 25 and will end on June 30th of 26. Relatedly, anything that the closure of John Fuller School created in any kind of a budgetary capacity will not be understood before June 30th of this year. So budget surpluses that we had this year have nothing to do with the decision to close John Fuller. We will know that, we will have the end result of that in June. Well, at the end of June, they'll close the books. We'll start hearing about the final tally sometime in September of this year, which we'll be meeting about that time to
Do you anticipate any
that.
real savings from the closing of the school?
That's very hard to say. It's very, very muddled, Mark. And about my prediction about this year, I hate to defer this, and if we need to come back, maybe that is appropriate if you think it would be something that folks would want to hear about, because I couldn't begin to guess. I have some preliminary thoughts about this year. I know I deferred last year, but we don't have much of the data that we need to do our jobs yet this year. And we are already 2/3 of the way through our deliberative process of presentations, group discussions. We have 2 more regular meetings, and then we have one meeting that will be essentially for, 2 more meetings total, one of which is for us to talk about the budgets, both the school and the town, and to discuss just what you're asking about what our strategies are going to be going forward. There's an awful lot of information that we have not received from the school district yet. And to be fair, we haven't seen the warrant articles from the town yet either.
Wow. Okay, I'll tell you what, let's take a break and we'll come back and do a second half to our program because we got a lot to talk about, all righty?
Sure.
Okay, hold on. All right.
You got any
We good?
cookies?
Yeah, cookies.